Dear students, Namaskar. Today we will be discussing the political, social, education, religious, and scientific scenario during the Victorian age. Now, the first logical question that would strike you is that why are we discussing these scenarios when we don't have them included in our syllabus? The reason is that literature cannot grow in vacuum. Literature is interlinked with the social, political, cultural, religious, and various other scenarios of a nation. So it becomes essential to understand these scenarios in order to understand the literature that was produced in a nation. And so, dear students, today we will be discussing all these points. And before we begin, please excuse me for my handwriting. With that being said, let us begin. Right. Let us discuss the background of the Victorian age first. King William IV was the king of the United Kingdom from 1830 till 1837. Now, when we say United Kingdom, it includes England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Now, yes. So after the death of King William IV, Victoria, who was a niece of King William IV, she ascended the throne in 1837. The age is named after her, and her reign lasted till her death in 1901. Let us first discuss the political scenario during the Victorian age. Now, even though Queen Victoria, as in Victoria, ascended the throne in 1837 and became the queen, there are several critics who consider 1832 as the beginning of the Victorian age. The reason is the Reform Act of 1832. Now, to understand the Reform Act of 1832, we need to understand the parliament system of England. The parliament system of England is divided into monarchy, House of the Lords, House of the Commons. Now, to simplify it, let me compare the parliament system of England with the parliament system of our nation, India. Our parliament system is almost the same as England's, except we do not have a monarch. Okay. Now, in India, what we consider as Rajya Sabha is the same as House of the Lords. And same way, what we have as Lok Sabha, they have House of Commons. Right. And we are all aware that when in India the general elections are contested, the citizens of India vote for the people who will be elected in the Lok Sabha. We, the citizens of India, do not directly elect any members of the Rajya Sabha. And so, the party that wins the majority of seats in Lok Sabha governs our nation. This is exactly the same scenario in England. Right. Now, the people elected in the House of Commons in England, they ultimately govern England. Now, the problem during the Victorian age was that during that time, middle class people were not entitled to vote. Now, neither were they entitled to vote, nor were they entitled to contest an election. So then, who were entitled to vote during that time? Those would be landholders, merchants, and traders. And because there was hardly any representation of the middle class people, their problems were not taken seriously. This situation started to change with the Reform Act of 1832, because with the implementation of the Reform Act of 1832, the compulsion that only landholders and merchants and traders, they will not be the only people who will be contesting an election and voting in an election. If we take into consideration when Queen Victoria ascended the throne, only one fifth, excuse me, only one fifth of the adult males were entitled to vote. And the reason why we are specifying adult males is because women were not eligible or entitled to vote or contest in an election. We will be discussing the condition of women during the social scenario. Next. Right. After 1832, few more reform acts were passed in 1867 and 1884. Now, all these reform acts combined, they further solidified England as a democratic nation. Colonization and imperialism. We all understand what colonization means: to colonize another nation's territory. So, England had heavily started to colonize several different territories of other nations of the world. Imperialism, which which means a country's influence through colonization or military warfare on the other nation. So England had started not only colonization but also imperialism. It started to heavily dominate other nations, whether it was through diplomacy or warfare. In 1801, England added a new department titled Colonial Office. Apart from India, I hope you are aware that in 1857, the first uprising of India occurred during that time. So, apart from India, England had acquired rule over Pacific islands such as New Zealand, Tonga, Fiji, and several African nations such as Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, Zimbabwe, and various other nations. Let us come to the social scenario during the Victorian age. Right. So, in 1831, the population of England was roughly 13 million. I hope I'm getting the zeros correct here. And the population increased to 32 million in 1901. So, if we take into consideration the reign of Queen Victoria, the population increased to almost 29 million. Yes. Industrial revolution began in England. Please remember, students, that the industrial revolution, it began in England. Now, there were several different reasons for the industrial revolution to begin in England. Some of them are England had better aspects of like such as working conditions, even labor availability, support of the British Parliament, and also the expansion of the British Empire. Right. So together, all these conditions, the working conditions, labor availability, support of the British Parliament, expansion of the British Empire, all these aspects together helped in industrial revolution beginning in England. The textile industry, which was the first to receive a boost in 1800, the textile industry contributed only 5% of the national income of England. Right. Right. So in 1800, the contribution of the textile industry to the overall national income, the income that is generated in England, was 5%. Just after 15 years, textile industry contributed 40% in the overall generation of income, the national income of England. Can you imagine the contribution of textile industry to the national income of England in just 15 years? It almost increased to 35%. And not only the textile industry, but even coal, iron, and chemical industries, they all grew. The first intercity railway in the world, it opened between Liverpool and Manchester in 1830. Now, because of industrial revolution taking place, huge scale migration began. Migration from the urban area, apologies, migration from the rural areas to the urban areas. By the middle of the 19th century, more than half the population was residing in either towns and cities. While industrial revolution created class of capitalists and mill owners, it also created class of laborers and factory workers. We'll be discussing about them further. Yes. Next points. We are continuing with the social scenarios only. Now, due to this, the condition of lower class people was quite pitiable. When such a huge scale migration is taking place from rural areas to urban areas, there were several different problems that the lower class people, middle class, and especially the lower class people endured at that time. There was rapid growth of slums. We talk about sanitation problem. We talk about hygiene. We talk about spread of diseases. The lower class people who had migrated to the urban areas and residing in slums, they suffered a lot at that time. In 1833, two important laws were passed: abolishment of child labor and abolishment of slavery throughout the British territories. In 1847, the British government passed the 10 Hours Act, which brought a little relief to the workers. England was heavily fighting in terms of the Irish question, heavily debating the Irish question. Now, what do we mean by Irish question? Now, as we are all aware that Queen Victoria was the monarch of United Kingdom, which comprised of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. The problem was that the England government was not focusing on the problems that the Irish people were suffering. the agricultural problem, the financial problem, the social problems. So these problems, England was not focusing, giving ample attention to these problems of Ireland. So the Irish question was heavily debated during that time. Yeah. Condition of women. When we discussed about the condition of lower class people, the condition of women was equally pitiable because neither did they have any electoral rights, nor did they have any rights to own a property. In fact, if the women wanted to pursue education, there were hardly any women colleges in England in the first half of the Victorian age. Right. Next point. Let's discuss the religious scenario of England during the Victorian age. So, the Church of England, which is also known as the Anglican Church, Church of England was a major religious institution. Apart from it, other religious institutions were also present, such as Methodism, Oxford Movement, Evangelicalism. Church attendance was compulsory. Right. We all know how England, since the time of Elizabethan age, has been suffering through religious and political problems. So church attendance during the Victorian age, it was compulsory. The biggest opposition that religion faced in England was undoubtedly the publication of On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. I'm assuming that we all would be familiar with Charles Darwin and his publication of On the Origin of Species, which talks about the evolution. So, after the publication of this work, there was a heavy criticism that followed during the Victorian age. I will be discussing about Charles Darwin and On the Origin of Species when we discuss scientific scenario during the Victorian age, which is next. Right. Scientific scenario during the Victorian age. England advanced and prospered a lot in terms of advancement of science. There were several discoveries and inventions that occurred during the Victorian age. For example, steam railway and steamship was introduced at that time, and both steam railway as well as steamship helped in the transportation of goods, and hence steam railways as well as steamship, they are all somehow related with the industrial revolution of England. Electric telegraph was invented in 1844. In 1851, the Great Exhibition of London was organized. Now, this is a very important event that happened in the history of England. In terms of, because during the Great Exhibition of England, sorry, the Great Exhibition of London, England displayed its success and achievements in front of the world, and it exhibited or demonstrated success and achievements with extreme pomp and splendor. Right, so that is what the Great Exhibition of London was. Apart from it, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876. Thomas Alva Edison invented phonograph in 1877, and the electric light bulb in 1879. Definitely the most significant scientific event was the publication of Charles Darwin on the origin of species in 1859. Now, the reason why on the origin of species became controversial is because it negated the biblical theory of mankind. It proved that the biblical theory of mankind was incorrect, and that so what is the biblical theory of mankind? The biblical theory of mankind suggests that human beings, we are all created in the image of God. And when, after the publication of On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, when people started reading this book, they were shocked, because their foundations, their beliefs, they were shaken. Till now, people were believing in God. People were believing in Bible. And this book tried to prove that all our beliefs, our faith in the biblical theory of mankind is incorrect. So it was a jolt to several people at that time. And this made the book highly controversial during the Victorian age. My last point before I end today's session is discussing the educational scenario during the Victorian age. In 1833, the same year when child labor was abolished, in the same year, the Education Grant Act gave the first state aid to religious societies to build schools. Yes, that happened in 1833. The first college for women, which is the Bedford College in London, was founded in 1849. So women who wanted to pursue higher education, they could get admitted in Bedford College, but that happened in 1849. 1849. Elementary Education Act of 1870 made free public education available to all children aged between 5 years to 13 years. And further, the Sandons Act of 1876, it made education for all children compulsory. Right, students. So today we discussed about the political, social, religious, scientific, and education scenarios. I hope discussing all these scenarios will be helpful to us in terms of understanding the literature that was written during the Victorian age. With that, I will be ending my session today. If you have any doubts or any queries regarding this session, kindly post your questions in the section on the Moodle platform. I will see you next with the literary features of the Victorian age. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.